The moment she stepped into the softly lit Café Tilde copyright with her little girl's small hand wrapped tightly in hers, every instinct in her screamed that she had already made a terrible mistake. The hum of quiet conversations, the clink of cups, and the warm glow of hanging lights all blurred together as her heart pounded with one heavy thought echoing in her chest. This was supposed to be a blind date, not a test of her worth as a mother. She felt the weight of unseen eyes, imagined judgments, and a future she was afraid to hope for. One choice, one step through that door, and everything she had carefully protected could either fall apart or finally begin to heal. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that remind us how powerful compassion can be, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Kindness Speaks. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them most. She had not planned it this way. In fact, she had promised herself she would never do this. Ever since her life had split into a before and after, she had built walls around her heart that felt as solid as stone. The before was a life of shared dreams, quiet laughter, and the certainty that someone would always be there to catch her if she fell. The after was a small apartment, late-night worries, and the little girl who depended on her for everything. She had learned how to be strong because she had no other choice. Dating was a word she barely allowed herself to think about, let alone act on. But loneliness has a way of sneaking in during the quiet moments, especially after bedtime, when the world grows still and fears grow loud. The invitation had come unexpectedly through a mutual friend who meant well, someone who insisted that she deserved happiness and that not all men would see her situation as a burden. She had laughed it off at first, then ignored it, then finally, after a long night of staring at the ceiling while her daughter slept beside her, she had agreed. The only problem was that her babysitter cancelled at the last minute, and there was no family to call, no backup plan. She had stood in her kitchen staring at her phone, debating whether to cancel entirely, when her daughter looked up at her with trusting eyes and asked if they were going somewhere nice. In that moment, she made a decision born of exhaustion, hope, and fear. She would bring her little girl along, just this once, and face whatever came next. Her daughter was small for her age, with hair that refused to stay neat and eyes that observed the world with quiet seriousness. She had already learned too much about disappointment and change, yet she still believed in small joys, like warm muffins and colorful straws. As they walked toward the table where the man from the blind date was waiting, the mother felt her chest tighten. She imagined the awkward silence, the polite smile, the quick excuse he might make before leaving. She had prepared herself for rejection many times in her life, but this felt different. This rejection would not just be about her, it would be about the child holding her hand. The man stood as they approached, and in that instant, she noticed details she had not expected to matter so much. He looked tired in a familiar way, like someone who carried responsibility quietly. His clothes were simple, his posture calm, and his eyes held a softness that surprised her. For a split second, she thought she saw confusion cross his face when he noticed the little girl, and her heart sank. She braced herself for disappointment, ready to apologize, ready to explain, ready to retreat with dignity and tact. She had rehearsed this moment in her head, prepared for the sting. But instead of irritation or judgment, something else happened. His expression changed, not to annoyance, but to understanding. There was recognition there, as if he had just been reminded of something deeply personal. He did not look at her as someone who had broken the rules of dating etiquette. He looked at her as someone who was trying to survive and still believe in something better. That single look, warm and steady, felt like air-filling lungs that had been holding their breath for years. He did not rush the moment. He acknowledged the little girl with the same respect he offered her mother, making space instead of shrinking away. The tension that had coiled in her shoulders slowly loosened. Though she was still guarded, still cautious, she had learned that hope could be dangerous if given too freely. As they sat down, she noticed how her daughter relaxed too, swinging her feet and glancing around with curiosity rather than fear. Children sense safety in ways adults often forget how to. As the evening unfolded, the mother found herself slowly opening up despite her best efforts to remain guarded. She shared pieces of her life without fully realizing she was doing it, small truths slipping out between sips of coffee and careful smiles. She spoke about working long hours, about learning how to stretch a budget, about the strange mix of pride and exhaustion that came with raising a child alone. She did not paint herself as a hero or a victim. She simply told her story the way it was, imperfect and real. What surprised her most was how easy it felt, how she did not feel the need to apologize for her circumstances. The man listened in a way that felt rare. He did not interrupt, did not offer solutions, did not treat her experiences like problems to be fixed. He listened with the kind of attention that says her story matters. Slowly, he shared his own truth. He too was a single parent, raising a child who was not there that night because his own arrangements had worked out differently. His life had also been split into a before and after, marked by loss and responsibility and nights where sleep was scarce. As he spoke, she realized that the recognition she had seen in his eyes earlier was no coincidence. He understood because he had walked a similar path. The little girl, sensing a shift she could not name, began to relax fully. She laughed more easily, pointed out things on the walls, and asked innocent questions about the dessert menu. The mother watched this with a mix of relief and wonder. She had grown used to being hyper-aware of how her child affected other people, always ready to shield her from unkind reactions. Seeing her daughter welcomed without hesitation felt like a small miracle. As the evening deepened, something else began to happen. Something fragile and unexpected. The mother felt herself remembering parts of who she used to be before survival became her main identity. She remembered what it felt like to imagine a future that was not just about getting through the next day. The fear did not disappear, but it softened enough to allow curiosity in. She wondered what it might be like to share burdens instead of carrying them alone, to be seen not just as a mother but as a woman with hopes and fears of her own. Yet beneath the warmth, the challenges remained. She knew that one pleasant evening did not erase the reality of her life. She knew that blending lives, especially when children were involved, was never simple. She worried about attachment, about the risk of introducing someone into her daughter's world only to have them leave. She had seen the damage that inconsistency could do, and she was determined to protect her child at all costs. These thoughts lingered quietly, even as laughter filled the space between them. The man, too, seemed aware of the weight of the moment. He did not rush to make promises or paint grand visions of the future. Instead, he focused on the present, on making the moment safe and genuine. That restraint, that respect, spoke louder than any romantic gesture could have. It told her that he valued stability as much as she did, that he understood the stakes without needing them explained. When the evening came to an end, the mother felt a familiar knot of uncertainty tighten in her chest. Goodbyes had become complicated things in her life, always loaded with questions and what-ifs. She prepared herself once again for disappointment, for the possibility that this would be the last time their paths crossed. She had learned not to assume, not to hope too loudly. But as they parted ways, there was no awkwardness, no rushed farewell. There was a sense of calm possibility, like a door left gently open instead of slammed shut. In the days that followed, she found herself replaying moments from that evening during quiet hours. She noticed a subtle shift in her energy, a lightness she had not felt in a long time. It did not mean her problems disappeared. Bills still needed to be paid, mornings were still rushed, and exhaustion still followed her like a shadow. But alongside all of that, there was now a small thread of anticipation, a reminder that her life was not defined solely by struggle. They continued to see each other slowly, carefully, with intention. They met in parks and family-friendly places, creating spaces where children could be children and adults could observe without pressure. The mother watched closely, always alert for signs that something might not be right. What she saw instead was consistency. She saw patience when plans needed to change, understanding when responsibilities came first, and kindness that extended naturally to her daughter without feeling forced. Each small interaction built trust brick by brick. Her daughter, perceptive as ever, began to look forward to these outings. The mother noticed how her child's laughter came more easily, how she seemed lighter, less burdened by worries she should never have carried so young. It was not that this new presence replaced anything or anyone. It simply added something positive, something stable, to her world. Watching this filled the mother with a complicated mix of gratitude and fear. Gratitude for the joy, fear of losing it. The man's reaction on that first night continued to ripple outward, changing more than just one evening. It changed the way the mother saw herself. She began to release some of the shame she had unknowingly carried, the belief that her circumstances made her less deserving of love or understanding. She realized that her strength, her devotion, and her resilience were not flaws to be overlooked but qualities that mattered deeply. Being a mother was not something to hide. It was part of her story, and in the right hands, it was honored rather than tolerated. As seasons shifted and time moved forward, the challenges did not vanish. There were difficult conversations, moments of doubt, and times when old fears resurfaced. There were disagreements about parenting styles, schedules, and boundaries. But there was also a shared commitment to handle those challenges with honesty and respect. They learned that love, especially when children are involved, is less about grand gestures and more about showing up, day after day, in small but meaningful ways. The mother often thought back to that first moment in the cafe. Copyright, to the fear that nearly stopped her from walking through the door. She realized how close she had come to missing out on something transformative because of fear. She also recognized that the courage she had shown that night was not just for herself but for her daughter. By taking that risk, she had modeled resilience and hope, showing her child that it is possible to be cautious and brave at the same time. The story did not end with the perfect fairy tale conclusion. Life remained complex and unpredictable, but it did evolve into something richer and more connected than it had been before. The blind date that had felt like a potential disaster became a turning point, not because it solved everything, but because it reminded her that kindness still existed in unexpected places. One person's understanding reaction had been enough to change the direction of her life, to soften her guarded heart and allow light to seep in through the cracks. Near the end of this journey, as she watched her daughter playing nearby, laughing freely in a way that filled the air with warmth, the mother felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She understood that love does not always arrive in the form we expect. Sometimes it shows up quietly, in a look of understanding, in patience instead of judgment, in acceptance instead of rejection. That single reaction, on one ordinary evening, had set everything else in motion. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own struggles, hopes, or second chances, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your engagement helps keep stories of compassion and humanity alive. Before this story ends, we invite you to leave a comment sharing what this journey made you feel, or a moment in your own life when kindness changed everything for you. Sometimes, your words can become the hope someone else is searching for.